Good evening and welcome back to the Finance and Operations Committee in-person and virtual meeting for April 25th. The meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee will please come to order. The district posted this evening's agenda to board docs at least 24 hours prior to the commencement of this meeting. Is there a motion to approve that previously posted agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you. Are there any amendments to offer?
There are no amendments.
Thank you. The agenda has been moved and seconded. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, please signify by saying I oppose and state your name for the record. Those abstaining, please signify by saying I abstain and state your name for the record. The motion carried. I will now turn over the Finance and Operations Committee meeting to Co-Chair Director Ward Savage.
Thank you very much, President Brown. Mr. Rogers, would you mind beginning with an overview of your agenda item for this evening, and you can go right into the presentation, please.
Sure. Tonight we have one agenda item. I will be presenting the 2023-2024 proposed final budget, which will ask for board action to be voted on at the May board meeting. In compliance with the Act 1 timeline, I'll present the proposed final budget, and we will ask the board to consider the budget for approval at the May 9th meeting. The final budget presentation will be on June 20th, which will incorporate any legislative and/or internal changes from now until then. And I will jump right into the presentation. So first, just to review, where we are right now and the Act 1 timeline. So far this year, we had the November committee meeting on the 22nd, where we presented the preliminary budget versus an accelerated opt-out. Just keep in mind our base index, and you'll hear this a few times, is 4.1% with an adjusted index for the district at 6%. On December 6th, based on that presentation on November 22nd, the board voted and approved a resolution not to exceed 6% for the 2023-24 fiscal year, meaning that through this budget process, the budget must stay below a 6% tax increase. That's the absolute maximum. So to review, once we finish this meeting, what the next steps are based on the Act 1 timeline. As I said before, on May 9th, we would ask the board to adopt a resolution for the proposed final budget. At that time, the proposed final budget in Form PDE 2028 would be made available for public inspection. At the May 23rd committee meeting, we'd have another budget discussion publicly. On June 10th, and no later than June 10th, we're required to issue a notice of the intent to adopt the final budget at the special voting meeting on the 20th. So June 20th, we would, as we have in the past few years, we would hold at the committee meeting, give an updated presentation on the final budget of any changes that may happen, again, from now till then. Following that meeting, we would have a special voting meeting for the board to adopt the final budget. And as always, we just like to note that based on the Act 1 timeline and what's put before us, the board has to approve and adopt a final budget no later than June 30th. So this is just a historical review, same as what was presented on November 22nd, showing the current school year, 22-23, the base index of 3.4 and the adjusted of 5%. And then for the budget year in question, 23-24, base index again 4.1 and adjusted at 6% for a tax increase. This is a historical view back comparing what the actual tax increase has been on the final approved budget for the district compared to that same year's base index and adjusted index. So as you look at the presentation, the highlighted in yellow is what the district actually approved through the final budget process back in 16-17 all the way up through this current school year. And you can look at that and you can see the visual representation in the graph below showing what was actually approved versus the base and adjusted. You can see that in most years we're at the base index, if not below it, or right around it. So for the most recent school year, you can see that 1.01% tax increase. And in that year, again, the base was 3.4 and adjusted of 5%. We show this typically so that the public and the board is well aware that the district does everything in its power to make sure that the tax increase is as manageable as possible for the community and the district while balancing the budget to the best of our ability. So you can see that the goal is always to be around the base, if not below, in many years, especially this current school year. So although the board can go up to 6%, I want to make it very clear that I know that's not the board's intention. The public needs to understand that that's just a requirement. The board has to go down one path or the other, whether it's the preliminary budget or accepting the accelerated opt-out and committing to staying below the adjusted index. So again, 6 is absolutely the highest, but the goal is always to be below the base index in most years. So this is a breakdown to show that, where we landed over the past years, from all the way back to 15, 16, all the way up through this current year and the proposed budget that we'll be discussing tonight. So what this shows is from top to bottom, the budgeted revenues, the budgeted expenses, and then what we committed to fund balance, as fund balance to balance the actual budget. We typically show this in comparison to the previous slide, and I forgot to mention this, but on that previous slide, you can see the 16-17 school year where it's a 0% tax increase. In that year prior, 15-16, on this slide, this is why this goes back one more year. You can see the use of fund balance was $2.5 million. In that year, we went to a 0% tax increase. The use of fund balance jumped by $4 million. You can see the trend across the years where it moves. Now, if you're reading with me left to right, 6.5 million, 7 million in 17-18. And then we start to try and bring that amount down little by little each year, trying to fight back to what we believe to be a comfortable number to balance your budget using your fund balance. And we'll get to how we derive that number and what really identifies a comfort level. But you can see the trends. Outside of the 21-22 school year, the use of fund balance had continued to go down. In that 21-22 school year, there was a lot of unknowns. That was really driven off of the idea we had no idea what state funding was going to be, even more so than this current school year. We were coming out of COVID. There were a lot of outside pressures. The state did not pass a budget, as they haven't in many years, by the time the board is required to vote on this budget. So we went in very conservatively. At the time, there were many different aspects to where the state funding was going to be coming in, projections all the way to as low as your previous 3-year average. So we went in with a base no increase to the state funding, hoping that we did receive state funding, which was the case, and that 6.7, almost 6.8, was really a very, very conservative number and somewhat of an outlier in the past couple years of how we've been trending. So you can see that this current year, we're right about $4.5 million, and this is higher going into the proposed budget. Now, if we go back historically and look at our proposed versus our final budget, we're always going to take the time from April all the way through June to refine the budget and try to come in with better numbers than what we're presenting tonight. So my goal is, and Dr. McGarry's goal is always to improve the budget. We'll take the next 2 months to refine every piece of it and try to come in that same trend, working that use of fund balance down. I will say, as I was referencing a little bit before, that $2.5 million really was related to, projected unspent expenditures due to turnover all the way back to 15-16. Based on, cost of living increases, contractual increases, we've really, in the 22-23 budget year, projected that use of fund balance to actually be almost all of it would be what we projected to be unspent salaries and benefits for unfilled positions. We're going through, a time right now where we're having a teacher shortage that we've never seen anything like this. So although, as this is presented, $2.5 million was always the goal to try and get back to that use of fund balance, the reality is we're closer to $4.5 million in what we believe to be a balanced budget. So that 22-23 budget this current year would be what we consider a balanced budget, because we're not expecting to spend that money. And if we did and we used fund balance, then we would adjust course going into the next budget cycle, and that would be great. That would mean that we're filling all of our teaching positions, we're retaining staff. That's the ultimate goal, and we have a plan in place that, if and when we get to that point, how we would address the budgets leading into that over multiple years. Next, I just want to review some of the budget assumptions as it stands today. This proposed budget is built off of a 2.25% tax increase. And again, the base index is 4.1 and they adjusted 6%. So as I was saying in the previous slide, the goal was to come in at or below base index, and I think we really outperformed being below the base index at a 2.25% tax increase. Note that the budgeted state funding for the district, we actually base this budget off of 75% of what the current proposed budget is. We're not sure if we're going to get 100%. So from a conservative perspective, we figured we wanted to come in, we looked at multiple different models, anywhere from, no funding to 50%, 75, we built it out. Dr. McGarry and I went through it pretty in very great depth. And 75% of that funding, we feel comfortable that there would be a decent chance that we're going to get 75% of what was proposed. More recently, with the advocacy work that's being done, I know that there's a fight for it actually to be increased even more, which would be fantastic. It would just help us balance the budget even better. But for now, that's where we felt going out with the proposed budget at 75% of the governor's proposal. So you can see that under basic ed, that's a $4.18 million increase. And now that's also includes the level up funding. So in the current year, we had basic ed as one funding line item and then level up as a secondary line item. That has been consolidated into one line item in the current proposed budget, but it's a $4.1 million increase over the current year's allotment. Special ed goes up by $980,000. It's represented as $0.98 million, so just under $1 million at 75%. Again, this budget includes a new bond issuance to continue on our capital improvement plan, more specifically associated with the Clifton Heights Middle School project. It also includes $25.56 million in ESSER funding. The ESSER spending timelines are still being evaluated and adjusted for the final budget. So when we get to that June budget, we will be refining all of them, including title funding as well, because up until recently, we did not have the allocations for our awards for the title programs. We just got the Title I funding, but this budget was already developed at that time. So that's just a key indicator and an example of what we would be adding to the budget and revising as we move forward. I will say that the reference to the $25.5 million in ESSER is important because every year we show the graphs in this presentation to show where funding's coming from, how it's split across the local, state, federal, and other sources. And our federal funding is being presented in somewhat of an inflated manner because we have $25 million of funding that is not recurring and will go away, in September of '24. So included in this budget is also various staffing additions. So we can run down the slide here on the left-hand side. You'll see new positions that are being added to the budget. So we plan to add 5 English learner teachers, 2 special education teachers, which are actually being reassigned from St. Cal to Primus and the K Center. Through the consolidation of St. Cal into Aronimink, we were able to actually staff more efficiently, and there's an offset to the budget. So although all these positions are on here as adds, they're in some cases being reallocated, FTEs as we call them, full-time equivalents. So from a budgetary impact, it was not nearly as big of an impact with the St. Cal merger aside. So then you see reading specialists, 7 reading specialists, 6 building level technicians, that's technology support staff. So our plan is to add 6. That'll be able to allow us to have a designated tech person in every single one of our buildings. which is very important considering how much technology the board's been able to infuse into the district over the past 3 years. 24 instructional teaching assistants. That's the teacher apprenticeship program that we've discussed many times publicly and internally. A supervisor of guidance and a supervisor of elementary instructional technology. Now, on the right-hand side, you see two that are adjustments to existing budgeted positions, so it's not quite the same impact to a budget year over year. We're going to add an additional high school assistant principal and a supervisor of secondary instructional technology. So we will have a supervisor of instructional technology for the elementary level and then also the secondary level. This is a high-level review of where the budget stands. So you can see it's in comparison to the current 22-23 final budget. And as we go down, it shows revenues, expenditures exceeding revenues. Then we add in what the proposed tax increase is to show what that use of fund balance would be. So the revenues on the top line are neutral, as if there was no tax increase, and then we show that later so you can see the difference and the impact. So you can see top to bottom of revenues are $262, almost $0.5 million, $270 million in expenditures, leaving a $7.6 million gap between our expenditures and revenues. When you add in that 2.25% tax increase, you add almost $2.5 million in additional revenue, bringing the fund balance committed to balance the budget to $5.17 million. This slide's what we typically show publicly so that we can really hone in on what does 2.5% mean for a taxpayer. So this, and what's highlighted there in that gold box, is 2.25% of a tax increase on different assessed valued homes. So we show them anywhere from $50,000 in assessment up to $350,000, and this would be what the annual impact, meaning what it would increase from this year to next year's taxes. So at $50,000, it would be an additional $28 for the year. At $350,000 on the higher end would be $196 in total. So now we'll get into breaking down revenue first. We'll go through in a couple different categories, starting at a higher level, and then we'll work through the expenditures as well. So what you can see here is the breakdown, a high level of our revenue from local, state, federal, and other sources. You can see it's showing local at 45%, state at 42%, federal at 13%, and other 0% because it's below 1%. In comparison to the current year budget, it's a net increase of $25 million, or 10.43% of an increase. And again, it's somewhat inflated due to the $25 million in federal sources. So if you were to net that out, our percentages are closer to, local is closer to 50%, the state's at just under 47%, federal goes down to 3.67%. So that 13% comes down pretty quick when you take out the ESSER funding. As we hone in on the local, to really just break down in your local taxes of the 45%, but in the total budget, 40% is specific to real estate tax collection. So your actual tax bill out to all of our property owners and taxpayers in the district. We like to show that, at 40% of a total budget, that's in comparison to federal and local sources and the state sources rather. We recognize it's a heavy lift for our taxpayers. We have been lucky over the past few years that there has been a shift from the state in increasing funding to districts like ours. And that is absolutely helping us with how much we're assessing taxes, whether or not, what is that percentage increase, that we're using to balance our budget. To break down a little bit further, so here, this slide is the local sources. This is all your local revenue. And that first line there, the $107.7 million, you can see that is the taxes levied for local taxes. Again, the total here is $118 million. In comparison to the current year budget at $113, just under $114, it's about a $4 million increase, almost 4.1, or a 3.6% increase. Next, the state sources. You can break down, go basic ed and other operating subsidies at just under $60 million, special ed funding at $11 million, non-educational programs, $10 million, state revenue, the Ready to Learn grant and some others at just about $2 million, and then the revenue from the Commonwealth for Social Security and PSERS at $28.3 million. This is a $12.5 million dollar increase at 12.7% increase year over year. The federal and other sources, you can see here that you recognize the $25 million that was previously referenced for ESSER funding under the 8,700 line item, the third one down. So we're at $34.3 million, which is an $8.3 million increase over the prior year at 32% increase. So that's heavily driven by the federal funding. And then our transfers of $900,000 is exactly the same as last year. That has to do with the funding that comes from food service over for overhead for the district operating our food service programs, and we typically don't see a big difference from one year to the next. So we'll jump into the expenditures now that we've made it through the revenue. You can see that at the bottom, you see a total of the $270 million and the breakdown therein. So instructional services, 160.3, support services, 68 million, non-instructional, 4.1, infrastructure, 25 point, almost 2, debt service, 7.7, prior year expenses, $10,000, capital reserve transfer, 500,000, and a contingency of $4 million. So you can see that 4 million is very much in line with where we had our use of fund balance for this current school year. And then you can see the percentages broken down on the pie chart to the right, with our instructional and support services obviously taking up the vast majority of the budget, as you would expect. And then look at the expenditures, slightly different. There's different categories here. In the last slide, we were looking at the function, so it's really like the type of expenditure versus drilling down in total in the lower level object funds and accounts. So you can see that our salary and benefits at almost 166 million, purchase services at 73, supplies and others at 30.8 million. This is a 10.5% increase over the current year budget. And again, in this same slide, you could see that salary and benefits at 62% of our budget, purchase services at 27, and supplies and other at 11%. Now, diving down into those categories a little bit deeper, you can see here everything from personnel and salaries to health benefits, Social Security, retirement, and other benefits, totaling 165.9 million. This is a $8.1 million increase over the current year budget, or 5.1% increase. Now, the vast majority of what's on this slide is driven by employee contracts and is set, and it's not exactly fluid. So in most cases, this is set based on contractual language that the board has already approved. I will say that one thing that we've been experiencing under the healthcare is being part of the healthcare trust through the IU. We have been performing extremely well, and in the past 2 years, we've actually had a decrease in cost for medical, which is unheard of in the private market. We give a lot of credit to the trust. I sit on the board with one of our UDA reps, and the trust has been operating extremely efficiently, and we have definitely seen the benefit of that over the past 2 years with our renewal rates. Next up is the purchase service. So you see the account codes 300, 400, and 500. Purchase of professional and technology services, property services, and other purchase services, totaling 73.3 million. This is a $14 million increase over the current year budget at 24.5% of an increase. Now, a big chunk of that $14 million increase has to do with, in the 400s, include a code within that is 450, which is actually construction services. So a lot of the work that's being done around the district is really built into that and driving that increase. A lot of that's being funded by ESSER funds that we had projects like the Aronimink window projects, the auditoriums at the middle school, the Performing Arts Center, our libraries, all of these improvement projects that we have in place. So a lot of it is being funded by federal funds. So although that looks like a very big jump, that again is another area where you're going to see somewhat of an inflated number when you go for comparison purposes. The last slide for this area would be supplies and other, and you'll see from the 600s to the 900s, supplies, property purchase, other objects, and other financing uses, totaling $30.8 million, which is a $3.1 million increase over the current year budget, which is an 11.5% increase. And again, there are some items that are in there. On the 600s, you have a code 650, which is actually technology purchase. So a lot of the money that's being used for ESSER is going into the improvement of technology in the district. So it does show at 11.5%, it is driving that number a little bit up. And I will say, when I reference those types of purchases, they are one-time purchases that we've built into the budget, designed so that we are not in a situation where we can't balance a budget in the next year or two because we are too reliant on recurring costs using ESSER money to bridge that gap. And again, and I'll just hold this up here as a review. This is the same as the previous slide showing the Act 1 timeline. Again, reviewing that after tonight's meeting, if the board moves it forward, we would ask the board to adopt a resolution to adopt or pass a resolution to adopt the proposed final budget. The budget would be made available publicly in the PD 2028. We'd present again at the committee meeting in May, on May 23rd, and at the June 20th committee meeting, June 10th, no later than June 10th, we would publicly advertise the notice of intent to adopt the final budget, and then we would have a special voting meeting following the June 20th committee meeting. And again, the latest the board can adopt the final budget is June 30th. And that concludes my presentation. If the board has any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Rogers. Before we take it around the board, I just want to make one statement and then ask a few clarifying questions for everyone's benefit. First off, I want to thank everyone who contributes to the investments that we have to make in the educational experiences of our children, not only property and business owners, but also the people who then take on those costs, say, consumers who go to these businesses, and those increased costs are passed on to the services or goods that they have to buy, or people who rent. A lot of those costs are then passed on to the people who rent based on how much more in taxes the building owner is going to have to deal with in taxes. So we appreciate everyone's contributions. I did have 3 clarifying questions, if you don't mind. First one is, and I know you've done this before and it's been awesome every time you have, can you stress to the public how important it is that we have a healthy fund balance? First question. Second question would be, would you mind also sharing with the public what the benefit or consequence would be of borrowing increased money against the fund balance to bring that percentage that we have to tax the public by down? And then also third question, and I'm not sure if you'd be able to do this on the spot, if we were to say take that 2.25 percentage down any lower, could you quantify that in terms of a lost educational opportunity as a result of not having X amount of dollars? This position wouldn't exist, or this program, we wouldn't be able to offer it. Would you be able to do any of that? I know I threw a lot at you.
Can you just repeat the second one? I want to make sure I understand what you're asking.
Yeah, the second question was, can you explain the benefit or the consequence to the public of borrowing more against the fund balance to compensate for bringing down what we would have to then tax the public?
So as far as a fund balance and a healthy fund balance, at a district our size, the unassigned fund balance is actually set by the state. We cannot exceed 8% in an unassigned fund balance. We, off the top of my head, we're right around 6% in unassigned fund balance. As far as borrowing against it, meaning, when I hear borrowing, I think of a debt borrowing, right? We go out and we issue bonds to deal with the construction projects and, improve the facilities that we've been working on. So if we were to balance our budgets on a higher amount of use of fund balance, you're essentially balancing your budget on a savings account. A fund balance, for when you try to relate it to, your average person, it's likely going to be considered somewhat of a savings account. it's there. There's only certain ways for it to increase. You don't budget, in most cases, you can't budget to increase your fund balance. Yeah, it just happens over time based on, outcomes of, different scenarios throughout many years. So once you start dwindling away at that fund balance, if you run out, you are going to be in a situation where you're essentially bankrupt. You can't pay your bills. There are districts who have had that experience where they've gone out with 0% tax increases year over year, or they weren't willing to even go close to their base index, and are in that situation right now where they have to increase their taxes to their adjusted index to 6%. So for decisions made, throughout history of staying at 0% or a very low tax increase, and using the fund balance, they've ran out of fund balance and now don't have a choice but to increase taxes because there is no fund balance to balance the budget. Good budget practice is to try and have a balanced budget. You don't want to actually use your fund balance. So when I say the use of fund balance that's listed in our budget is roughly what we're projecting out over a 10-year analysis of unspent funds because of unfilled positions, which is historically what happens here. We do see a lot of turnover. It takes time to fill those positions. Now more than ever, it's even harder. If you're budgeting using that money, it's going to go away eventually. So to your point of borrowing against it or increasing the amount of use of fund balance in order to lower the tax increase is not fiscally responsible in my opinion. If the directive of the board was reduce the tax increase, I would be going to your third question. What are we removing from the budget in order to do so? You don't want to spend or budget to spend more than you can afford. So we're very confident in the budget we brought forward. We do think that there's work to be, we're going to put more work into it just like we do every other year. As far as a decrease from a 2.25% tax increase to shift that to a lower dollar amount or a lower percentage, you would go from anywhere from 0% needing, as what was presented here, at 7.6 million. Between that 5.1 use of fund balance, or almost 5.2, to 7.6. So you're at a differential of almost $2.5 million. It's that tax increase on that slide. So the 2.45 million, that's the dollar amount. So if you were to say, we're going to go from anywhere from 0 to 2.5, well, what does that look like? How much do you want to decrease it? For every, for a 0.25%, you could drop the 2.45 down to 2.18. At 1.5%, it would be 1.6. At 1%, you're at 1.09. Well, you look at that gap, and then educationally, we would have to make a decision. Where are we finding that? Are we going to not do one of the capital improvement projects that we were looking to improve? Personally, that's where I would look first. I am very hesitant to have to go to Dr. McGarry or anybody in the curriculum instruction office and ask for them to help balance a budget. I'd prefer to try and find a way that's less impactful for direct instruction, although a capital improvement project, a repaved parking lot, may not be a direct impact to education, but there is an indirect impact to improving the quality of our buildings and what our students are experiencing. So to say dropping that percentage down and taking something out of the budget, that's likely a place that we would go first. What's hard there is historically that's what's been done. And we just got a facility study completed that shows in the next 2 years we have in excess of $20 million of improvements to be made just on our existing buildings. That's not including closing out the Aronimink project, closing out 8201, getting Clifton underway and under construction. That's a big chunk of change to try and complete the work in a report that came out showing in the next 2 years we have $20+ million of things that should be addressed in 1 to 2 years. This budget, as it stands right now, will put us in a situation where we can start addressing those needs and that report. And that will come at another presentation. I think it would be a lot to swallow on one night to couple that, but it's important to note that, as we went through and showed those comparisons, there's a lot of money, there's money that was added to the budget to be able to start addressing the needs of our buildings based on that report. So did I answer all three questions? Okay.
Damien, can I, as a superintendent, can I add to some of those pieces? First, I mean, Craig deserves a lot of credit, the team. You know, Craig meets with every single building administrator and administrator in his district for their budget, and they're long meetings. Yeah, they're longer when I'm there, yeah. They try to have them without me. I think one of the key slides on here is, to me, slide number 8. You know, first and foremost, I think this board has been very aggressive and strong in trying to fix facilities. You've made no bones about that. We've done a lot of projects in a very short period of time, and that's to be proud of. And we're going to, again, highlight those in the next couple of months. I guess 10 or 11 years ago, and during my press conference on March 28th, I shared that there's, I believe, a direct correlation. When education funding cuts happened, programs in higher education were cut and reduced, and then fewer people became educators. That's just the reality of it, especially in hard-to-fill jobs now, like social workers, guidance counselors, psychologists, speech pathologists, math, science. There's fewer of those good people. At that time, we cut somewhere north of 20 reading specialists. You know, in the mid-2000s, 2008, 2009, we cut over 20 reading specialists in the school district. We cut multiple high school positions, phys ed positions. Numerous positions were cut in the school district, and we're now on slide number 8. I could tell you, and I've done this before in presentations, at Biowood Elementary School, I had 2 literacy coaches, 2 math coaches, I think about 6 building subs at that time every single day that were in that building, and somewhere between 6 to 8 full-time reading specialists in that building at that time. We cut close to 30 reading specialists in around 2008, 2009, 2010. We cut field trips. Field trips were cut out of the school district. So during that period of time, a lot of reductions were made, a lot of cutting of programs, a lot of cutting of staff took place. And as a result, that happened because public education in Pennsylvania was being cut, was being challenged, and I think that's why there's a teacher shortage now. So we're trying to get back to, on this slide, adding some reading specialists, especially to our Title I schools that need them, Biowood, Stonehurst, right? EL teachers, our EL population has exploded. So we were trying to add EL teachers in the school district. My concern, and I want you to know this, and I've had this with Craig, and it's his concern, and this is to my colleagues in the back that are smiling back there, I'm very worried about filling these jobs. And I want to be clear about this. My concern is we're going to put them in the budget. We need them. I want to be crystal clear. We need these jobs. But my concern is filling these jobs when you ask for these jobs, right? That's the concern that I worry about, Damien, that's a part of this. The other part that we could maybe make some adjustments, and Craig, you may have said this, I'm sorry, I was reading an email that you sent me earlier about something else, and that is we just got some of the recent updates in the federal title funding, and that might be able to offset some of these costs as well.
We just yesterday got the allocations, and it looks like our Title I is going to be increasing by about $500,000. Our initial reaction to that would likely be to address, there are many of these positions that are actually going to title schools. And for the ones going to those schools, we would fund it with we would look at using it to offset the cost, which is just, you know, it's a way to add the resources, and it's exactly how Title I is meant to be spent. But again, with receiving it in short notice leading up to this, we were not able to accommodate including it or allocating it in this proposed budget, but it will be into the final budget.
Thanks for your hard work on the budget. I just wanted to reiterate, I sort of popped my hand up during slide 5 for the public that's here. The base Act 1 index is assigned to us by the state, as well as the adjusted Act 1 index. This is basically their permission slip for what they're sort of expecting us to tax, because they're basically not willing to fund public education, and that's what we've been fighting for years and years. So I just wanted to clarify that. I think that's a really important thing. And, you know, I've gone to Harrisburg many times along with many other people on this board, and they always ask us if we're if we're raising the taxes as much as our permission slip, basically. And if we don't, they're like, well, why are you here? Why are you asking me for more money? So, you know, unfortunately, they do kick the can down the road. But I did have a few, like, detail questions about the budget, and I know in years past, we've had this, like, you know, big list with costs associated on slide number 8, Dr. McGarry and Craig. And I'm just wondering if this is exactly, I know you're concerned about filling the positions, but is this really what we need? Do we need more than this? I mean, I can think of additional assistant principals at the middle school level. And I just want to make sure that that you're asking for what you need. Because I know there's a lot of concerns with staffing and things like that, but, you know, really what we need for kids. And that's one of my questions. And then I can move on to the next one if you want to do it one at a time.
No, go right ahead.
And then I also want to make sure that we've talked in the past a little bit about evening custodians and youth programming. And I know that we're getting a lot of pressure from some youth organizations on the costs to basically cover the costs of the evening custodians. And I just wanted to know if in the next budget, Craig, if you could just give us an idea of how much that would cost to have evening custodians, and then the youth organizations wouldn't be charged, or if that's something that you're considering in this budget, I'm not sure. I think that's really all I wanted to ask at the moment. And just for clarification's sake for the public, the exact dollar amount of these new positions on page 8? That's it.
So do you want the total increase to the budget based on
Just the
each of the
position
positions?
parts, yeah.
Give me a couple minutes.
Okay.
I'll see if I can pull that together.
Or tomorrow's fine.
I'll answer the other
Okay.
questions that you have.
Okay.
I'll start with the short-term memory one. As far as the facilities use are concerned, again, you know, I want to make this very clear to everybody involved and to the board, and I appreciate this discussion, and I hope this does not turn into a lengthy one this evening. We had public discussions at the beginning of the year. I want to make it clear, youth organizations right now that qualify under the policy the board updated and approved in the fall are not paying any fee to rent any space. So let me, if I can go through that very quickly. Youth organizations are not paying any fee to rent spaces. Where the conflict and the confusion has come up is that I think some members of the public feel like the board budgets custodians, and like when I was, you know, you think that custodians are there all day, every day. They're not. Contractually, custodians have a contract in a union, and their day ends similarly to a typical day, around 3:30 or 4 o'clock. That day's over. I coach in the community. I'm here, and everybody, I've had these conversations. I have family members that are on local parochial youth athletic boards who, you know, think that their taxes are paying for the custodian. Their taxes are paying for the custodian during the school day. After hours, if we need a custodian to go there to open up a building and close the building or clean up, there's a cost. That cost currently is $17.03 per hour. It's cheap. I appreciate somebody saying that. It's cheap. Now, what happens is that youth organizations historically in this community, understandably so, permit space and lock it down for months at a time. Not one space, but multiple spaces. And we'll be one of the first ones to get a call, if not a board member, that there wasn't somebody there to open a door. Well, you have a custodian going out to open that door to be there, there's a cost. What we have also created is a Google document communicating with the public that if you're not going to go on that night for practice, let us know so we don't have to send a custodian out so there's no charge. Well, some folks don't follow that process. A custodian goes out, they're going to get paid. We're simply asking for that back and forth. Currently, there's only 2 youth organizations who have not followed that process that way. All of the others have. They've paid their bills. We've also set up a situation where if you're a youth organization and you want to become, quote, a custodian of ours, to be there to open and handle it, will allow that to offset the cost of those custodial fees. That has been explained to every youth organization. Marvin holds in-person meetings, virtual meetings. A Google Doc is explained to everybody. So many of those organizations have taken us up on that. So as a result, many of the youth organizations' fees are nominal, if any at all. The turf field's a whole different conversation. That's a huge asset for this community, giving that away for free, although just this weekend, thank you, the board, late at night on Saturday because of the rain, the Raiders asked to have the fee waived to play on the turf field, and you were allowing me to do that, which they were appreciative of that, thank you. I think we are okay if you say to us, cover those fees, and if it's a youth organization, we'll go through the policy with Neil. I don't want to, usurp the board's authority as far as policy is concerned, because it is a policy. We could certainly come back and say, in a presentation, this is hypothetically what you'd be looking at as far as the fees associated with the custodian going out there. We can put it into the budget, and if the board and the community want to say to youth organizations, there's no cost to use the facilities as long as X number of those community members live in this community. I want to be clear about something else. Makes me unpopular I do have a life outside of here where I work with kids, as I said. I remind those individuals too, unfortunately, some of our youth organizations, and I coach in some of these, the kids do not live in the Upper Darby School District playing those youth sports. So much like I said for other opportunities, in other school communities, they would not give free use of facilities to non-tax-paying residents in those youth organizations. So we have in place here in Upper Darby is a percentage of those in this community that are a member of that youth organization will have those fees waived, right? So we need to be mindful of keeping that in place, that the taxpayers in Upper Darby are getting a benefit to that, and not non-tax-paying residents getting access to these facilities. So as long as we put these procedural safeguards in place, and if the board wants us to look at that and put it in the budget, you would simply be saying to youth organizations, in accordance with your policy, X number of those individuals living in the community, a part of that youth organization, as well as the updates that you made, we don't have a problem if you want us to waive those fees. We would put it into the budget and cover that cost. It would add to the budget a little bit, but that's something for the board to tell us they would like us to do. The other,
I was asking.
Yep.
Because we are having a budget discussion tonight.
sure.
I have no clue how much we're paying those evening custodians. So it's hard for-
$17.03
I
an
know
hour.
how much it is an hour. I mean, like, for the whole year.
sure.
How much they're how much,
So just to be clear, because I know we focus on the custodian. First, adding a custodian, a night custodian, just generally speaking, let's do a full-time night custodian. I don't think, although it will solve the problem you're questioning, it's not going to help the district outside of that. It's actually going to be significantly more expensive to hire a full-time employee to cover events that may or may not be occurring on a regular basis. And our administrative recommendation would not be adding night custodians. We have enough recreation custodians and other resources to cover opening and covering the use of facilities. It's not about adding any employees. I just want to make that clear. What you'd be asking is reducing the revenue on the district side. So the net is really the revenue side. You're looking at waiving the fees in turn, reducing the revenue, not impacting. Our expenditures are going to be projected out to be what they are because we're covering, each of those events on a regular basis. It's just whether or not the board wants us to follow the policy and collect the fee we're following the policy. When Dan says we'd be happy to waive the fee, we wouldn't be waiving the fee. The board would be waiving the fee based on the policy. So we're just following the policy that was recently revised. If the board wants to explore opening the policy and further revising and defining what that is,
that's
by all
not-
means, and I'll build it into the budget.
Right, so I wasn't asking to have the policy discussion today. I just want to know, for the budget, what that cost would be and impact to this budget.
It depends on how that's defined. That's why I got to policy. I don't have those numbers in front of me. But I'm making it clear because I get accused on a regular basis of not
I'm
waiving
not
fees. And I'm not in a position to waive a fee if it's outside of the policy. That's the only reason why I bring that up.
Right.
But to your question of how much does that cost? Roughly $2.36 million.
Thank you. Now I'm finished.
you had a question one. I started with, he answered three, two.
Oh, right, you're right, about,
one.
if we have all the staff we need, assistant
Oh,
principals
yeah.
and things like that included in this budget.
So Vice President Fields, we had, some safety and security conversations in executive session, Board President Brown, and there's been board members reaching out to me following that meeting. What does support look like? We've had conversations with our elementary school principals, middle school principals, high school principals. As you know, you added an assistant principal at Drexel Middle School, which is appreciative. In this, for context and purposes of this, the lead teacher positions that exist in the school district, they're at the high school, they're going to be that's going to be turned into an assistant principal, so they're going to be getting an additional resource and support. You were gracious enough just last year to add 11 elementary school principals. We're giving that a chance to work itself out. We're looking at the larger schools. We just want to make sure that we have an understanding after this year. We don't want to do it all at once. What is the metrics that would say the number of students, the special education program, that would then all of a sudden mean you get a second assistant principal at a larger elementary school? In meeting with the elementary schools, they're looking for some additional support by way of maybe noontime support, cafeteria support. So we've been creative about how we're trying to use some of the food service dollars to help add those positions during recess time and cafeteria time where there's a lot of activity going on, and add some of those supports and resources, and look for more of a pupil services ask potentially next year. But we also don't want to just add that right now if we can't fill those positions either. This is not what we're asking for makes us perfect in everything we're trying to do. This is not the wish list that we get every single year that has all those things. We debate that conversation. We went out there and said to you all the things that we wanted, that we need. I think, we did that one year, and it got us into hot water a long time ago. It's like, probably 6 or 7 years ago. There's a substantial need in the school district, so this is not the total wish list. This is what things like, I would say that the 7 reading specialists are in need. As I said, I'm worried about filling them. The EL teachers are what you need. We're adding, because of the merger, essentially shifting special education positions to buildings, so the merger is going to allow us to offset that add to the budget because there's increases in special ed, but the merger is allowing us not to have to add that staff to make this happen. So these are really, I would say, outside of probably the supervisor of guidance, which I do think we need, but we're putting that in there to help build the guidance issues that we're hearing from high school kids about making sure kids are getting how to pay for college and what is the career path and the mentorship program. I think these are what you really need to function as a school district. It's not the total comprehensive, above and beyond list. Yeah, this is realistic.
So, but I heard you say that the principals asked for support staff. That's not in the budget.
No, what I said was that the principals understand this year that they were grateful that they got an additional assistant principal right now. They asked after the conversation, and we processed through what they would need and look like. It is in the budget. It's not an add of additional staff. Food service-wise, we're going to be able to add, through the food service budget, support in the cafeteria and the recess yard.
Okay.
That is being added at the elementary school level. I'm sorry. And then at the middle school, we added an assistant principal to Drexel Hill. They both feel like they're in a good place right now. The concern becomes when lead teachers at Beverly Hills move on to a different job, they don't want to lose that support, so that's when we can start to turn those other positions into supports. Right now, you don't want to just, replace something that's working well, right? They have lead teachers who've been in those jobs, they're doing a good job right now, so we don't want to rip that out and start over in some of those positions at the middle schools either.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
Mine is pretty quick. To Rachel's point, this is not that utopia list, right, that Dr. Council used to give us with, 10 of everything and a partridge on a pear tree, right? That's if money was no object, right? We normally would see that slide, and I think that's what Director Mitchell was looking for, that we normally see, and then it
Wasn't
brings it
looking
back
for
down
it.
to, I'm sorry.
I wasn't looking for
Well, I mean,
it.
I
just
was,
wanted-
because we normally see it, but then we bring it back down to reality, and that's what I think this is, right? This is what your professional opinion, Dr. McGarry, what we need next year to do our best work, correct?
Yeah, and again, after much debate, I want to be very clear, and so does the team that I have, but their response to me is, we need these things. We can't not go and ask for them. My concern is we're going to put these in the budget, and filling them is not going to be easy in this current environment. But the attitude is, we need these things. We need the reading special at the elementary school level. The EL teacher, the EL population is increasing. My only concern is we have 3 open EL positions right now, right? They're my concerns when we go into this. We have to be careful, too, that we're just going to add positions, and then you can't staff them. So I understand there's some concerns. I know that individuals have conversations outside of here, and one person tells one person this, and that's what's going on. But it's much more complicated to whittle this down to what we can do and what we can afford versus that's part of my job is to push back in those conversations to get there. But we've met with elementary school principals, middle school principals, the high school team with what we have and where we are. If we had all the money in the world and staffing could be filled, I do think that Highland Park getting an assistant principal, Hillcrest because the special education supports, right? Bywood Elementary School, given its size, would probably use those supports. But then it becomes this gray area of, okay, what number, like Stonehurst student population is not as large any longer as Bywood's is, but I would argue that Stonehurst, if we put a criteria, let's say of 600, a student with 600 or more kids and a special education program should get a second assistant principal. Well, Stonehurst has under 500 or around 500, but I would argue they could benefit from additional support too. It's like, where does it stop adding? Like when we had this conversation, we got up to adding 11 assistant principals at all the elementary schools on top of the 11 you just added. That's huge money, right? So we got to be careful.
That's what we pay you for, right?
Yeah,
To make those decisions
yeah.
where we can best utilize.
Correct. But I understand the concerns. I want you to know that we are having these conversations. We are processing our way through it. We are going to try to set some criteria because I think we're going to have to get there one day. I do think we're going to have to come back to the table and say, Highland Park, Hillcrest has an emotional support program, plus a life skills program. There's IEP meetings they have to run every single day. It might not be enough with just one assistant principal and principal. We are having those conversations, and we will probably most likely, if the money were there, this slide would look different.
I'll try and be quick. If we could just look at slide 11 briefly. Rachel said some of what I wanted to say, but I just want to highlight that when people ask, why are our taxes so high, that state 42% and local 45%, our neighboring states, the state contributes considerably more than we get from our state. And so it's two things. One, we just don't get as much from the state as happens in other states. And then two, the way that state funding is distributed is not as equitable as it should be. We know this because we have a fair funding formula. It's just not used. And this is, I just felt the need, I had to say something about this because this is an important moment right now where we have an opportunity after this fair funding lawsuit has been decided on that we are supposed to be changing our education funding. And so, members of the community who are listening or who are here, I hope that they will be paying attention to that and be, raising their voices also in Harrisburg and telling them we need this money. As Rachel said, this Act 1 index is basically an admission from Harrisburg that we don't give you enough money, so here's what you can do to get more. Just take it from your local families, your local taxpayers. So that we're at this sort of crossroads right now. This year, the next year or two, that is going to decide whether or not we're going to actually change this or not. And I really hope we get to see some change, but I guess we'll see.
We will be having a discussion of facilities use and fees regarding them in an upcoming committee meeting. That'll be in more detail, and we encourage people to add to that conversation.
Just to add one question, because I said I didn't have the numbers in front of me. But with a quick projection based on, the trends I have in front of me, and just understand that with COVID, the policies changed 2 times, the fees have changed, within that. We waived fees through COVID. We waived fees this past winter because some groups didn't get the advantage of the waived fee during COVID. But I would project around $200,000 in lost revenue on that if under the current board policy with projecting out the use that went through. You may not see as much use with a fee, I'm not positive, but at that time, the use to run the programs that were run during that winter session, and trying to project that out with what it would look like in the spring, roughly in the $200,000 range.
Any other feedback from board members? Seeing none, it's now the time for public comment. We'll take priority for those who are physically present. Is there anyone physically present who would like to make comment? Please announce your name and your address.
Joanne Namavong, 133 North Pennock. I have a ton of questions, but I'm going to limit it to 3. Regarding, Mr. Rogers, you said that I think you're expecting or hoping to get about 4.1 million extra dollars from Pennsylvania.
Yes, that's correct.
Would that reduce then the fund balance usage, or is that already included in that?
That number's included in the proposed budget.
So
If we get additional funding, it would then reduce the use of fund balance and/or, as Director Warsavage pointed out, we would likely look at the tax increase.
Okay,
and
so,
as
but
a
if we get
reduction.
that 4.1, then it wouldn't be 5.1, it would be like 1.
No, that
That
number is
is with-
included in the budget.
Oh, okay.
That number's included,
Oh,
yes.
okay. Second question, picking off Director Warsavage, the fund balance. What is the fund balance as of the end of this school year? Because I noticed that, over the last 8 years, we've used 45 million. So what is our current fund balance? Do you know? Approximately, I'm just looking for.
I'll pull it up quickly, because
Okay.
I don't want to be on record quoting the wrong number off the top of my
I
head.
just want to make sure that I add, to be clear, we have not spent all 45 million of that fund balance. Over that period of time, we're using fund balance, and then part of the concern, as we talked about earlier, based on the personnel and things like that, typically comes from that turnover in staffing. That's hard to predict. Sometimes, fortunately, we don't have to spend all the fund balance.
Right, but are these numbers on this, these were then the budgeted amounts, these weren't actuals?
Correct.
Oh, okay, all right. So what is the fund balance approx? And then I'll just throw my third question out there while you're looking that up. You mentioned the ESSER funding. Can you just, because I'm, all these acronyms, I don't know them all. Explain, what does that stand for? I know it's coming from the federal government. And am I incorrect in what I heard you say later, that 25 million is being allocated to be used in this upcoming school year, 23-24, so it won't be something repetitive. So we won't have that for revenue in 24-25, but we also won't be allocating anything to spend against that. Is that correct? Okay,
So you asked for the acronyms. Obviously, there's
Yes.
the American Rescue Plan money.
okay.
Right, and then there's the, elementary, secondary emergency school relief funding, which is the ESSER funding is
Right.
geared toward elementary and secondary schools.
Say it one more time, elementary, sorry, elementary.
Elementary and secondary emergency school relief funds.
Okay, okay. Now, that's separate from the ARPA money? Well, I'm calling it
And
ARPA money.
there
but COVID
are
money?
different processes. In the ESSER funding, there were specific set-aside dollars that were meant to be used in criteria for things like summer school, learning loss, closing the achievement gap, professional development opportunities. So there were criteria in order to spend that money. That's the other thing I think people, that's a myth, that there's this money out there and people didn't spend it and they don't know how to spend it. The criteria is pretty specific. Also, at that time,
Right.
if you recall, there was also, as part of that American Rescue Plan money, things like ventilation. And you can use it for specific areas. And in Pennsylvania in particular, if everybody wants to race to fix their ventilation units in their schools, there's only a few qualified companies to do it,
Contractors,
contractors. It's hard to spend that
understand.
money in that truncated window of time. So it's earmarked specifically. We've given a presentation, Ms. Namabai, I can email it to you again. Last spring, we showed where we spent all the dollars, how it's been allocated, professional development, staff, mental health, trauma. So some of the money in that American, and the emergency emergency funding was also for mental health supports and services that we
Right,
added that
we
are being
talked about
covered by that.
But
The
is that
fear-
two separate buckets, though? So we have American Rescue Plan and then ESSER. Are they two separate
They're-
buckets? Because we're talking about ESSER in this budget, but I didn't see anything that was called American
Sure.
Rescue Plan money.
Go ahead, Craig.
Sorry.
So
Thanks.
the ESSER funding that I was referencing was really all-encompassing, you could call it pandemic relief money,
Yeah.
right? So there's
Okay.
different buckets, there were different grants that came out, they came out in different allotments.
Okay.
Included in the budget are ESSER 2, because there was an ESSER 1, 2, ESSER 3, which is called ARP ESSER,
Okay,
American Rescue Plan.
okay.
We also have a little bit in there for a school set-aside, which was a offshoot of ARP ESSER or ESSER 3, depending on who you ask. So all of those grants were included in that,
Okay,
which has been, we did go through previous presentations on that where because it's a lot of information
I know.
to digest.
I know.
So to try and pull that into a budget presentation in itself is, I
Sure.
apologize for kind of
No,
throwing it
no,
out there. We live this
no.
every day, and I understand that obviously.
Sure, I just
you know-
want to understand it for myself, but I get it that you can't put it all right
No, but
here.
your point of federal funding is you budget off of what's called a matching principle. So for every dollar you budget in revenue, there's a dollar in expense.
Sure, I understand that.
So there's a zero base
Yeah,
impact
no, I
to your
understand.
bottom line.
Okay.
As for your question about the fund balance, our most recent audited financial statements would be as of June 30th, 2022. So last school year would be closed out. We're obviously still in this school year, but the fund balance for our last audited year in total for the general fund was 31.36 million.
Okay,
In that is what I alluded to earlier of the 8% max on what's called unassigned fund balance. There's categories within it. Our unassigned's at 11.8 million, and then we have money that's set aside as what's called non-spendable, committed, and then assigned fund balance. So
Okay.
there's categories within that on our
Okay.
financial statements.
thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it, thank you.
Lee Jordan, 90 Pilgrim Lane, Drexel Hill. Just on your staffing additions, ideally, I would love to see like 1 or 2 more guidance counselors because we know that's such a huge position these days, and we just know everything going on. And I know they're overwhelmed. They were overwhelmed when my kids were here, and I just think things have just gotten even more complicated. And with the special education teachers, I guess going back to what Mr. Marshalak said, that we already know going into kindergarten, we're 20 to 30 children have been identified with autism. So ideally, I'd like to see that number go up a little bit, So, I mean, that's
Yeah,
just
sure.
what I'm,
I can-
but
I
I'm
can-
sure you have a huge list. And-
But I can add, Ms. Jordan, I can answer part of the question, and I apologize again, and I should have clarified this a little bit ago. Ms. Rosen, who's moved into an assistant principal's job at Drexel Hill Middle School, which is an add, they'll now have 5 administrators in the building. Her position is being backfilled, and it's been posted and turned into a guidance counselor. So we're
Okay.
adding guidance counselor supports in the district. I don't know if everybody is aware of this, but the board's also been supportive after the merger, and Marshall, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but all of our elementary schools for the first time will now have a guidance counselor at every elementary school, 1 full-time guidance counselor, which we never had before.
No,
So
right.
we've added guidance counselors, we've added, we'll have now 11 elementary school guidance counselors, we've added guidance counselors to the middle school. And the conversation that we're having, back to the earlier comment, is when the lead teacher position changes, our original plan was to turn that into guidance counselor supports at the middle schools. But now the concern is their certification doesn't allow them to handle student discipline. So do we turn that into an assistant principal versus a guidance counselor? We want to balance proactive, supportive, as well as punitive. So, we don't want to just have people doing discipline all day either. So that's why we're balancing what we're going to do. But the game plan is to continue to add in those areas.
All right, good, thank
Sure.
you. Oh, and Mr. Rogers, I would love if you added a couple of positions where we can pay our school taxes and drop them off at the school district. I don't
So
have to use the postal service anymore.
the ads that you see here are specific to changes for this year's budget, ads for the upcoming budget. There are a couple other positions that were added as well in 2 nurses. And in addition to that, there were 2 get-to guidance counselors at every elementary school. We did receive a competitive grant that the grant was used to add 2 guidance counselors that we're actually in the process of working on getting hired right now in this year that came out after the budget process of last year. So just kind of, again, that goes to Ms. Namavang's comment on how federal programs or grants are budgeted. It's net neutral. So, just to add that there.
Hi. I'm Laura Wentz, 7549 Parkview Road. I was just curious about the school bus driver situation. A lot of residents have expressed concerns about not having enough school bus drivers, or people bought a house because they were right next to a bus stop, but then discovered that the bus stop got moved and their child had to walk farther to school. So I was just curious. I'm sorry I was late, so I missed if you covered this already. So I just wanted to make sure I put it out there in case I didn't miss it. So.
Yeah, so, Ms. Woods, I can talk to you after this if you wanted to. It's not really an agenda item on here. Our committee meetings function, if it's an agenda item, we can talk about that. I
So
will
it's
simply.
not part of your budget to for bus drivers?
We have bus drivers budgeted in the budget, but as far as the bus stops and how the bus stops get handled, I'm sorry, I was misunderstanding your
Oh,
question.
I
guess.
got you. Okay.
So how the
two
bus
parts.
stops get handled and how the mapping and the boundaries work, it's not really part of the budget. But as far as bus drivers being in the budget,
Right.
they are in the budget.
Is there-
Staffing them is very difficult. The turnover in transportation, there are days when we have 10 to 12 to 15 bus drivers call out a day. So that's different. That's in the budget. We're trying to add bus drivers in the school district. And the board's already put that in previous budgets and the compensation for bus drivers. It's just hard to get a bus driver to fill the job. As far as the bus stops are concerned
That's
and
a
the
whole nother
maps,
issue.
that's a
Gotcha.
whole nother conversation. I'm more than happy to have that conversation with you, though.
Okay, great. So as far as the bus drivers themselves, are they represented by a union?
Yes,
Okay,
TWU.
wonderful. Great. That was another question that came up, and I didn't have the answer, so I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
Any other members of the public physically present like to make a comment? Seeing none, Ms. Buford, do we have any online or voicemail comments?
There are no online or voicemail comments.
Thank you very much. Mr. Rogers, would you mind reviewing your agenda item for this evening, please, sir?
Sure. Tonight, we presented the 2023-24 proposed final budget. We asked the board to move this forward to the May 9th vote, and I want to reiterate that, again, the May 9th vote would be for the proposed final budget presented here tonight that will likely, I can guarantee, will change leading up to the June 20th final presentation and special voting meeting for the final budget. We will provide an update at the May committee meeting as well of any updates we have at that point with the final presentation on June 20th. So I just ask whether or not the board's willing to move this forward to the May vote.
Yes, yes.
Yes.
And that's it.
And on that note, I now hand this evening's proceedings back to President Brown.
Thank you, Director Warsavage. A motion is in order for the adjournment of the Finance and Operations Committee meeting. Thank you. All in favor, meeting adjourned. All in favor? Aye. Meeting adjourned.